So now, after the heavy questions, it's time for the yoga session, sponsored by academia. So my name is Anna Lievska. I'm a postdoc at the University of Bonn, working on a project called Desirable Digitalization, Rethinking AI for Just and Sustainable Futures. It's a joint project between the University of Bonn and the University of Cambridge, funded by the Stiftung Mercator. What we do is precisely figure out how can we leverage concepts from the humanities, philosophy, and literature to understand some of the urgent questions in artificial intelligence. This is also going to be the only session, I think, in which you're going to see someone with handwritten notes. This is how analog I am. But luckily in academia, we have discovered PowerPoint. So feel free to tell your friends. I went to a session, there was a very well-dressed academic who used handwritten cards. So thank you. All right, so before I came to Bonn, I taught at Stanford University in Silicon Valley, where I had the luck to attend the very first conferences on generative AI. Just as ChatGPT came out, they organized all sorts of things at Stanford, in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco. And as an academic, this is a very new thing to me. We do not necessarily participate in these conferences, right? So I went to these conferences with the goal of seeing what is this new tool going to do to academia, right? So what I heard at the conferences were a lot of buzzwords that sounded very familiar. For instance, human-centered, creativity. And even today, so far in the keynote addresses, everyone spoke about value-driven AI. They spoke about human tendencies, about AI as an autonomous agent that could help us make decisions, or that there's even a lack of definition of what human intelligence is, so that we can actually understand what artificial intelligence can be. Well, it's your lucky day. In philosophy and literature, we already have pretty much a million theories of how human beings work and what intelligence is and how we can perhaps use these theories to then make your lives easier here. One of the most interesting things about these conferences, though, was that ChatGPT seems to do fundamentally one important thing. It's a language-based model, so what it is going to change for all of us, and especially for people who do education, is writing. That is the thing that it impacts the most. Since ChatGPT, I've had students who submit entire theses written with ChatGPT, right? So in a way, what they're doing is they're allowing this new technology to structure their thoughts. They are relinquishing their thinking abilities to an external agent. So this is where cognitive automation comes in, right? So if until the 19th century, the 20th century, we had an obsession with making labor easier, physical labor. Now, at the forefront of our interest is actually to ease the cognitive burden of people. Writing, thinking, making decisions. All of these things now can be taken care of by ChatGPT better and better, or better than most human beings can do that. All right, so now let us take a step back for a second. I would like to invite you all to close your eyes, lean back into your seat, and think about something. All of you. So now I'm going to stare at you. Just think about something. Let's take 15 seconds to do this. Okay, it's not collective hypnosis, I swear. Yeah. All right, so welcome back. What happened right now is that we all stopped our activities for a second, and we were out of order for a minute. The second thing is that you thought about things that are not immediately present to your cognition. You had to imagine things in your mind, so they're not things that you can see immediately. The most important thing that happened, though, is that you probably heard voices, not the ones in the hallway. You probably heard something in your mind. Now, this is where everything becomes interesting for us. Now, where do those thoughts come from? You were hearing a voice. Who is the interlocutor in your head? Who did you hear? Is it your mother-in-law? Is it a bully from, elementary school? Is it someone you love? Is it your boss? Is it your own voice, right? Now, that's called having an internal dialogue. Having that internal dialogue is what differentiates you from machines. Some people call that consciousness, having a consciousness, having that internal conversation with yourself, that kind of constant thinking, especially at night before we go to bed. Now, whether you cultivate that internal dialogue and know where your thoughts are coming from, now that differentiates you from other human beings, right? Having the internal dialogue that differentiates us from machines, practicing that internal dialogue and being critical about it is what differentiates us from other human beings. It's called, in other words, critical thinking. Not all of us engage in it. Now, today I want to leave you with these two thoughts from philosophy and literature, my fields. First, I want you to think about thinking, the activity of thinking, as an internal dialogue, a place where we pursue the quest for meaning. It's also the place where we become accountable for our own actions. And it's the place of moral considerations, where we think about what is right and what is wrong. We deliberate our actions, right? That's the first one. The second one is I will present you with a model of consciousness that perhaps, and you're the ones who should do this, I can just give you the ideas, perhaps it could create consciousness or it could lead to some kind of thinking in generative AIs. They have language, right? They can write. So why couldn't the next step be creating an internal dialogue within artificial intelligence so they can help us, in turn, practice our own? So the goal is to have industry and academia collaborate on this, in this effort to prevent cognitive automation and perhaps turn it into augmented thinking. What would that look like? So as you can see, I am very analog, but I'm pro-technology, so it would be great if we can come up with ways to collaborate on these issues. Now, here are the voices we hear in our heads. There are three options. It's been said that the primitive humans, or whatever, even the humans of the Homeric epics, like 2,000 years before Christ, what they heard in their heads, they thought those were the voices of the gods. So it's not your own voice, it's the God telling you what to do. This is a theory known as the bicameral mind, and it was invented by, or created by Julian Jaynes, a Princeton psychologist in the 70s. There's another option. The other option is we hear our own voice, right? This is the internal dialogue. Now, this is a theory that I like very much myself. It's by philosopher Hannah Arendt, and she took, as an example of this kind of internal dialogue, Socrates, one of the most famous philosophical figures in the world. He had a very robust sense of internal thinking and how that should happen. There's a third option, and this is the them. The philosopher Heidegger, for instance, called this das Man, hearing them in your voice. Now, what are these thems, unless there's some kind of clinical situation there? It's society, it's ideologies, dictators, religious authorities, the media. And today, we have an extra element to this, which is where it becomes interesting and dangerous for us, I think. We have social media. We have AI, right? We have Facebook, Twitter, Google, algorithms, perhaps even ChatGPT, suggesting our thoughts to us. Now, where is the limit? Where is the line? Do we know that this is happening? Are we aware of this intrusion, so to say? Now, this is what is called, in the last case, human-machine cognitive distribution, right? Why do we need this human-machine cognitive distribution? Well, especially since the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, humans are overburdened with all sorts of stimuli on a daily basis. We're bombarded with input. There's so many people out there, there's so much technology, there's so much knowledge, information, so we need to find some kind of way to deal with this noise. So the way we do it, perhaps in an unhealthy way or a healthy way, we engage in meditation, we go to the gym, we jog, I don't know, we engage in reckless sexual behavior, we scroll all the time on whatever, Facebook, Google, right? We do everything just not to hear that inner voice. We do not want that conversation because it's difficult. It's burdensome. So what we do now with ChatGPT is that we relinquish our thinking and we engage in cognitive automation to make this a bit easier. And I even asked ChatGPT, I'm like, can we think together? And he's like, sure, okay, whatever. Yeah, whatever that means. We can start thinking together. Great, I want to see how this is looking like. Now, this human cognitive distribution, human-machine cognitive distribution can look very good. However, there are some perils about it. The peril is that perhaps there could it could lead to a sort of return to that bicameral mind that original humans did. For instance, when Achilles in the Iliad slaughtered the entire Trojan army, and he was like, no, it's not my fault, it's the goddess who told me, right? So there is like this idea that we can now blame others, we can blame intrusions for our own actions. So we don't want that to happen, right? We want our own thoughts and we want our own moral accountability. Now this theory, again, it was created by Julian Jaynes. If you don't know him, he's actually the one behind the theory, the philosophy of Westworld, the famous HBO series where machines become conscious by learning to have an internal dialogue or realizing that it's not the coder who's telling them what to do, but it's themselves, right? This is how the bicameral mind looks like. You have the self, and you have these God voices telling you what to do, right? So Achilles and the goddess who's telling him to slaughter the entire Trojan army. Today, perhaps we have this situation, right? Perhaps these are the new gods. There is even a great book by Neil Gaiman called what American Gods, right? American Gods, where media, social, they're all turned into personified gods, right? So today maybe we have this situation. But what we want to do is cultivate the second option, this inner voice or the other fellow. We want to have an internal dialogue in which at the end of the night or for every decision that we make, whether whom we vote, who we date, what gym we sign up to, what restaurant we go to, right? All of this, it's made easier by cognitive automation, but we want to have some say in it in order to maintain our kind of moral integrity in the era of generative AI. So academia and industry could come together for critical thinking if what I'm saying so far makes sense, hopefully. There's been a paper now published at the University of Catania in Sicily, out of all places, that invented a chatbot. It invented a chatbot that's called the Socratic artificial mind. Now this is honey for my ears, if I can say that, because it's a chatbot that acts exactly like Socrates, who tried to instill that kind of someone earlier said there's something about challenging orthodoxies, where this chatbot is supposed to do that, right? You say, hi, Sam. No, Sam says, hi, I'm Sam, how can I help you? And you respond, hi, can we talk about the concept of happiness? And he's like, sure. And then the whole idea is that this chatbot is supposed to instill doubt in you, it's supposed to bring different points of view in your thinking so that you can kind of get destabilized and understand that there's more diversity out there, there are more options than just that one concept of happiness that you might have had, right? So now my proposal for today, in addition to the Socratic artificial mind, is perhaps what I call heteronymic thinking. Now, the term heteronym, how many of you have heard of this word? Yeah? Okay, wow, there are quite a few, okay. It's not a pseudonym, which is when an author writes under a fake name. It's a heteronym in the sense that an author has various other selves in which he or she or they publish. These are independent personalities, right? All of them have their own physical traits, their own style of writing even. So it's kind of a cultivation of a split personality. And this was invented by, as I mentioned before, by the Portuguese poet, I haven't mentioned, by the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa. At the turn of the 20th century, right? He cultivated this kind of heteronymic thinking, although he still remained himself, which means he promoted a kind of very robust internal dialogue. It's in writing, it represents various styles, and you can challenge yourself by still remaining yourself. So now I'm thinking, can we do this with ChatGPT? Can we do this with generative AI, right? I hope we can. I hope we could train them to assume multiple personalities, perhaps dialogue with one another, and dialogue with us, so we can ensure the cultivation of that kind of critical thinking that is so necessary for today in our world. Now, I want to leave you just with two questions when you leave this room. Yeah, this will be then consciousness and critical thinking. How robust is your internal dialogue? That will be the first question. And then the second one is, where do your thoughts come from? I think the answer to this question is still what differentiates you from machines, for now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna. Fascinating.
Thank you.
Question from my side. So we talk about AI replicating human intelligences, but we also have the concept of the alien intelligence.
Okay.
right? Where
Ooh, that's a hard one. Okay.
so where in that spectrum do you think things like large language models lie?
Yeah, I think I'm the wrong person to ask that question because I'm a hardcore humanist. I do think that we need to define human intelligence in order to understand artificial intelligence for now, just because there's so much mirroring going on. To think now about planetary or alien intelligences is interesting. It can bring a new perspective, but then that would mean that artificial intelligence is going to go farther than us. So then how are we going to understand the things that we created if we're applying a different type of intelligence to it for first? But again, that's the challenge that people ask me usually. So.
Yeah, cool. We have We have a bit of time, so one more question from the audience. Yes, the gentleman back there, maybe.
Not really a question, but more a comment. What you're suggesting also with regard to the different identities, we have done an experiment, and I've done that with a guy that I know from OpenAI and Microsoft, where you let ChatGPT discuss with Bart from Google and others, and you get some very interesting discussions going. And he actually did that with all of the members of parliament in Germany, kept them busy, pretending that he has a discussion going and stuff like that. So it's actually happening. It's one of the biggest real-life psychological experiments. And I'm really wondering what really the outcome is going to be,
Sure. No, that's super interesting. And I wish that would be made more public and that students already, children are taught to engage with these tools, right, in that kind of way, in a challenging way, so that it wouldn't just become another technology that allows us to procrastinate and not think, but something that will stimulate our thoughts, right?
I was hoping, congrats. That was a great speech.
Thank you.
I was hoping for some practical solution. You've just done that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you take that one step further and thinking of students or even people in the enterprise, how can we practically develop critical thinking? What would be an easy first step?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. So, at least from our point of view, for critical thinking to happen, you need two things. First, you need to create a space of solitude. That is fundamental. Solitude means not being alone with yourself, but together with yourself. Being able to practice that amicable internal dialogue. That means spaces in which we're away from scrolling, away from chatting, because we're never alone. There is a pandemic of loneliness, everyone speaks about that, but we're never solitary, because even at home at night, we're always scrolling, we're always chatting. That means there's no space for that internal dialogue to take place, right? We're scared of it. So that would be, how can we do that? First, create spaces. Maybe that's the university, an open university. Maybe the classroom is one of those spaces where people can come together and practice that kind of solitude, internal dialogue. And then you need the second step, which is public practice of judgment. And maybe this is where then Twitter and these other social media accounts can come into play. But these steps need to follow one another. You cannot just have the solitude and just public discussion. They need to feed into one another. So if we can insert that into education, into our practice, into the core of our society, I think it will be a useful way of going forward with generative AI. So, thank you.
Thanks, Anna.